Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be finally finishing off this series where we're looking through the articles. If you were watching yesterday, then you might have remembered I had to cut this video into two parts because it was too long. So this is the second part. Thanks to all the Patreon supporters, YouTube channel members, anyone that buys me a coffee, cash apps me. You guys are the best, because it seems now the YouTube algorithm has realized that I'm spreading the truth and it's starting to punish me. So if you can help out in any way, that's greatly appreciated. And if you can just drop a like and a comment. That's free. That really helps. And it does help in the battle against that nasty algorithm. So anyway, we will continue with the video from where we left off yesterday. So this article is talking about the Arabs and Turks and saying they are entirely distinct races of people. The Arabs are descended in part from Ishmael and in part from Jordan. The former call themselves most Arabs and the latter simply Arabs. The name Arab means an inhabitant of the West, Arabia being the west to the rest of Asia. In Europe, they were called Saracens, or inhabitants of the East, for the same reason, and in Africa, they were called the Moors because they conquered and took possession of Mauritania. Under the name of Saracens, the Arabs, within a comparatively short period after the death of their great prophet, conquered all the Asiatic and African provinces of the Roman Empire and imposed their religion upon the inhabitants. So we saw that with the Barbary coast, the Barbarian Empire. The Turks, coming afterwards, conquered the same countries and established their own dominion over the Arabs inhabiting them. Hence they are often confounded with them. But the Ottoman Turks are an entirely different race from the Arabs. They come from the banks of the Irtish, at the foot of the Altay Mountains, in the steppes of northern Asia, on the confines of China and Persia. Their original country corresponds in great measure with that which is known at this day as independent Tartary, and is inhabited by Kyrgyzs, Bukharians, Uzbeks, and Turkomans. They were a tribe of Scythian Tartars and were never known to history until the 6th century, whereas the Arabs had preserved their independence for 1,000 years against the kings of Assyria, Babylon, Egypt, and Syria before they were overcome by Alexander the Great. So this is talking about the Ottoman Turks coming from the Altay Mountains. So the region of Altay obviously just being a little bit south of what I was showing you before, that lake, Kithe Lakes or Kiten Lakes, Kisan Lakes, there's lots of names for it. But that I think is the lake, the one going into Altay, that's why it's called Altan on that other map that we saw. And it's saying that the Ottomans actually came from here. So is it possible that the Ottoman Empire is actually the Tartarian Empire coming from here? Our next article, we're getting close to the end now, is 1867. I think we've only got a few more to get through, but this one is called The Progress of Russia in Central Asia. So it says, though we are but very imperfectly informed of the advance of the Russians in Central Asia, we know that for several years they have been steadily conquering portions of independent Tartary and annexing them to the Russian dominions. In 1865, the country conquered until that time was constituted a Russian government province under the name of Turkestan. Since then, large additional conquests have been made, and a cable dispatch from St. Petersburg informs us that the country lately conquered has been constituted a new government under the command of General Kaufmann. Now, this is Konstantin Petrovich von Kaufmann. He was the Governor General of Russian Turkestan. He was the general that went in and took over most of it, and he died in 1882. So this is the guy, and I've seen quite a lot of references to him being quite an evil one. His treatment of the Tatars and independent Tartary was nothing less than genocide, apparently. He died at age 64 in Tashkent. And here it gives us the official conquest of Turkestan. At the high point of the Russian conquest of Turkestan in 1867, he became Governor General of the new province of Turkestan and held the post until his death, making himself a name in the expansion of the empire in Central Asia. The western part of the Khanate of Kokand along the Tartaria had already been captured, and the independence of the rest of the country became merely nominal. He accomplished a successful campaign in 1868 against the Emirate of Bukhara. Remember the Emir. So against the Emirate of Bukhara, capturing Samarkand and gradually subjugating the whole country. During the Kievan campaign of 1873, he attacked the Khanate of Khiva, took the capital, and forced the Khan to become a vassal of Russia. This was followed in 1875 by the campaign against Kokand, in which Kaufmann defeated the uprising Khan Nasreddin after an anti-Russian uprising against the previous ruler Khudayar. The fiction of Kokand's independence was ended, and the remaining rump of the Khanate in the Fergana Valley was annexed. This rapid absorption of the Khanates brought Russia into proximity to Afghanistan, and the reception of Kaufmann's emissaries by the Shir Ali Khan was a main cause of the Second Anglo-Afghan War. This next article is 1868, and again it is Russian advances in Asia. The Atlantic Cable has brought the very interesting intelligence that the Russians have recently fought a bloody battle with the army of the Khan of Bukhara, in which the latter was disastrously defeated and the Khan killed. This is an important event. It gives Russia now the whole of independent Tartary, save some very inconsiderable Khanates. Within a few years, the Tsar has conquered Khiva in the northwest and Kokand in the northeast, and now he adds to his vast dominions Bokhara in the south, west of the Caspian Sea, and brings his line almost in contact with that of British India. It says within a few years, the Tsar has conquered Khiva in the northwest and Kokand in the northeast, and now he adds his vast dominions Bokhara. So yes, he's already conquered Khiva and Kokand, and this is apparently in 1868, and now he's killed the Khan of Bokhara. And if we come to the Russian conquest of Central Asia, as they call it, just the Russian conquest of Central Asia, nothing to see here. The belligerents on the right are the Kazakh Khanate, the Bukhara Emirate, the Khiva Khanate, the Kokand Khanate, the Turkmen tribes, the Kyrgyz tribes, Afghanistan, and the British Empire. But the Bukhara till 1868 matches our article. Khiva until 1873 matches our other documents that it fell in 73. Kokand lasting till 76, matches what we saw 75, so 76, 75. But this article does make it sound like they've already been captured. So who knows, maybe those Khans rose up and tried to have a little battle for themselves. But we do know the Khan was killed from Bukhara, apparently. The article talks about the Tsar building a railway which will go from St. Petersburg down to the new areas in Turkestan, which will bring transportation of troops, provisions and arms to that province for the purpose of defensive or offensive war. We do see them building railways to every single one of these places. They take over a place and then they build a railway track to it. What was formerly known as independent Tartary in Central Asia contained the three cities of Khiva, Bukhara and Kokand, with the Sea of Aral in its centre. The intended invasion of Kokand in 1863 was deferred on account of the Polish insurrection. The plan, however, was carried out the next year in the capture of Turkestan and Avliata. The Great Battle of Vichtar, fought on the banks of the Juxartes, or Sayadaria, in May 1866, opened the way to a series of Russian victories which have established the military power of the empire in the entire country north of the Juxartes, from the Celestial Mountains to the Sea of Aral, and placed a Christian force in the heart of Turan. The battles of Samarkand, Khojend and Tashkent and the fall of Kimkand have been followed by the fall of Bukhara, the crowning triumph of the Russian military prowess in Central Asia. So yeah, we will come back and read this article again at the beginning of the next video. I'll read the whole thing, but for now that's all we needed to see. The next article is rather small. It's just Russian progress in Asia from 1868. The Atlantic Cable informs us of a further advance of Russian power in Central Asia. The kingdom or Khanate of Bukhara, the most powerful state of what used to be called independent Tartary, has been subjugated by the armies of the Tsar. The city of Bukhara, the capital, and the more ancient city of Samarkand, once the capital of Genghis Khan and Tamerlane, have been captured, giving to Russia the entire control of the valley of the Juxartes, whose headwaters mingle with those of the Indus. The single province or Khanate of Kunduz, about 150 miles across with 46,000 square miles of mountain and marsh, is all that now lies between the territories of Russia and the Punjab, the northwestern province of British India. Another from 1868, this says, the Russians do not mean to abandon their recent conquests in Central Asia, as has several times been reported. None of the important towns of Bukhara which have been occupied will be evacuated, and the army will at once receive large reinforcements. Russia has only the alternative in the Central Asian question to leave the whole of that country to the sole influence of Great Britain by bringing it under Russian rule. None of the independent countries, which is between Russia, China, India and Persia, possess any vitality, and all must sooner or later fall a prey to either Russia or England. It also says that the English have seemed to have made up their mind not to dispute to the Russians any part of independent Tartary, but in return they demand that Russia leave Afghanistan to the exclusive protection of England. I like that they call it protection. This point Russia will probably refuse to concede, and thus Afghanistan may be the first bone of contention between the two formidable rivals. From the New York Herald in 1869 we have, the Russian government intends establishing commercial depots in Upper Tartary, which declared its independence from China 3 years ago. So in 1866, Upper Tartary declared independence from China. So in 1873 from St. Petersburg, Khiva is taken. The imperialist Russian troops from Tashkent and Fort No. 1, after their concentration in the Balkan Hills, marched direct across the Kizilkum Desert, east of Lake Aral in the centre of independent Tartary, to the banks of the lower Oxus. This from the 1873 edition of the New York Herald gives us the seat of the war in Central Asia, a map showing the routes of the various Russian columns in the invasion and capture of Khiva. So if this is something that you are interested by, perhaps you should come find this article and go more into that, and you can have a look at the way that they supposedly moved. It seems that they came down this way, moving through what became Turkestan and down into Bukhara, Khiva, Kokand, as you can see, and Tashkent over here. And you can see the desert is now called the Karakum Desert. Another 1873 New York Herald. So the New York Herald really was giving us the information, wasn't it, about independent Tartary? Was any of it true, or was it altered? You tell me. But this just says, a dispatch from London informs us that since the fall of Khiva, the government of Russia has renewed its assurances that its troops will be withdrawn from the country when the Khan has been sufficiently punished for his barbarous treatment of Russian subjects. Assuming that this information is correct, these assurances are intended to allay the apprehensions of England touching the designs of Russia underlying this conquest of Khiva. It gives to Russia, in connection with previous military occupations in those regions, absolute control over the whole of the vast section of Central Asia known as Turkestan or Independent Tartary, the area of which is 792,000 square miles, or equal to about 17 times the area of the state of New York. All this vast country is now absolutely at the mercy of Russia, including the Khanates or kingdoms of Bukhara, Kunduz, Kokand and Khiva, and the Kyrgyz steppes or deserts, bordering on and partly occupied by Russia. Her authority is thus extended to the western frontier of the Chinese Empire, to the northwestern mountain barriers of British India, and to the eastern flank of Persia. This one coming from 1874 in the Portland Daily Press. Campaigning on the Oxus and the fall of Khiva. We hardly expected to find a finished book from a newspaper correspondent, but the subject was so striking and interesting that we entered upon its perusal with much interest. Independent Tartary was almost an unknown land until Vanbury's adventurous journey, disguised as a dervish at imminent peril to himself, made us familiar with it. Old legends of the conquests of Genghis Khan and Timur had given a charm of wonder to that mysterious country. The admirable romance, the adventures of a Quzilbash, foundy on the conquest of Nadir Shah, over which we pored in childhood, has thrilled us with admiration for the wild unconquerable Turkomans and the campaigning of Alexander the Great, with the fact that their race still holds sway over Constantinople, lent a historical interest to the people who have finally yielded to the arms of Russia. So this is talking about how the people in the 1800s, they seem to have heard tales of Nadir Shah and Genghis Khan and Tamerlane. And obviously Nadir Shah is that one we heard about before, Thomas Kuli Khan. That Alexander the Great is also a Tartar, a Turkoman, which is Tartar. So he's claiming that Alexander the Great is from the same yoke as Genghis Khan and Tamerlane. And that's interesting, isn't it? And obviously claiming that the fact that their race still holds sway over Constantinople, which many people will argue is the original Jerusalem, but that's a conversation for another day. This article makes some big claims. It's from 1875, again, the Portland Daily Press. It does seem to be only a few select newspapers that even know about independent Tartary, and they do like to print about it. But maybe that's just a limitation of our archival access. But looking at this article, we have a mention here. He's talking actually about Aryans, and we will talk more about that at another point as well. Well, I think we'll jump in at this point. Rome was 1500s year in the far future, Troy not to be founded for 500 years to come, although we now learn from recent explorations among its ruins that the Trojans were of this same Aryan race. The region from which the people came seems to have been independent Tartary, whence the tide of invasion has intermittently burst out in all ages, and yet it has ever been maintained at its own freedom, sometimes crushed but never submitting. Now that is big, because if the Trojans were Aryans from independent Tartary, well, the Trojans, after the fall of Troy, moved to Britain with Brutus. According to this, the Trojans are from independent Tartary, which would mean they were Tartars. So, supposedly, after the fall of Troy in 650 BC, they chilled for a little bit, and then about 500 BC, they boarded some boats at Lemnos. The remainders of these people, who were known as the tribes, because the tribes of Israel were with them, they were known as unstoppable hordes, sounds a lot like the Tartars, and they moved to Britain. So it's quite possible that the British are actually, well, not all of us, but most of us will be the descendants of the Aryan Tartars of Troy. Incredible. This article from 1876 from The Sun in New York, it talks about the conquest of Kokand. Russia has just annihilated one of the three great khanates of Central Asia. The word khanate, meaning a country under the rule of a khan, is a peculiar term of political geography applied in modern times almost exclusively to the three principal states of the region which was best known 20 years ago as independent Tartary, but is now more familiar under the name of Western Turkestan. In their order from west to east, these states are Khiva, Bukhara and Kokand. Russia's steady advance eastward since the Crimean War dismembered them, but did not destroy them, and although each was shorn of rich territory to be incorporated with the Russian Empire, each preserved a nominal independence up to the last summer. Kokand, the easternmost of the khanates, is the first to be absolutely absorbed, with the classic province of Fergana as its nucleus. It is an oval valley in the upper basin of the ancient Jaxartes, favoured with a mild climate and a productive soil. On the east it rises to the great plateau of Pamir, the roof of the world, and on the south the mountainous ridges of Karategin separate it from Wakhan and Badakhshan, the northern dependencies of Afghanistan. 10 years ago, the Russians annexed the western part of Kokand, including the celebrated city of Tashkent, while eastern Kokand, comprising the lovely vale of Andijan, with the town of that name, was left intact under the rule of Kuda Yar Khan, who was so unpopular with the Kipchak tribe as to be largely dependent upon Russia for the maintenance of his throne. He is the son-in-law of the Emir of Bukhara, and though himself an Uzbek Tartar, represented the Kyrgyz faction in Kokand politics as opposed to the Kipchaks. But the Kipchaks were famous warriors of old, when Babur conquered Hindustan and when Tamerlane ruled the Eastern world. They seem to have regained their ancient character for bravery, and last summer they rose against the Khan and his Russian superiors. So this talks more and more about the Russians moving through the Tartars, quite a lot to read, so if you'd like us to come back and go through some more of this on the next episode, I think we might do. From the same year of 1876, we see Russia is advancing towards India and the British Lion is uneasy, not to say scared. Russia has lately absorbed the Khanate of Kokand, one of the great states of independent Tartary, and Gorchakov's stomach is about as good as Bismarck's. Undoubtedly, says the New York Sun, this causes some uneasiness to English statesmen. It must hasten the adoption of a definite and logical policy in regard to Russia's Asiatic frontier. Shall England protect India by maintaining an intermediate zone of independent states, of which Afghanistan is the most important? Or shall she boldly advance her own outposts and occupy the great Afghan fortresses of Herat? So yeah, that's basically talking, once again, they're stoking up some fear about whether Russia is going to take India from the British. And I think as well, it's quite important to note that only a few newspapers are the ones giving this information out. So realistically, if you were someone alive at those times, you're getting all this information from these people. You don't know what the names are. They could have changed it. They could make people sound like barbarians, etc. when they're not. Make them sound like, uncivilized people without great cities, but we've seen the cities. We know that they're actually a lot better than you'd be led to believe by these tribes and khanates. But we'll move on to the final article now. This is from 1878, and we can see conquests in Central Asia. The four cities on the line of march were Tashkent, Samarkand, Bukhara and Balkh. They are situated in the vast region formerly known as Independent Tartary and now called West Turkestan. It comprises the khanates of Khiva, Kokand and Bukhara, a southern tier of small khanates, and finally Balkh. The Russian advance eastward and southward in Central Asia began early in the present century. 40 years ago, Persia had surrendered 70,000 square miles of territory and the Tartars 270,000 square miles. And within 20 years, the conquest of Khiva and Kokand has been completed, and Bukhara has been brought under Russian influence. The line of conquest did not begin on the eastern shore of the Caspian Sea, but led from Orenburg to the Sea of Aral, and thence along the banks of Tartaria. During the reign of Nicholas, a chain of trading posts and military stations were established on the river in the direction of Tashkent, Fort Perovsky being the strongest link. A military commission reported in 1851 that it was absolutely necessary to unite the new outpost line on that river with the advance posts on the Siberian frontier. After the Crimean War, this plan was carried into execution. In 1864, the city of Turkestan was captured, and in the following year, the frontier was extended beyond Tashkent. The Khans of Kokand and Bukhara, by their constant assaults upon the outposts, exposed themselves to a formidable campaign in 1868, when Samarkand surrendered to the Russian arms. The Khan of Bukhara was defeated in a battle and forced to sign a treaty of peace by which he acknowledged the right of the invaders to retain all that they had conquered. The Khanate of Khiva was not invaded until 1873, when an army was sent out in two main divisions, one advancing from Turkestan on the east and another from Orenburg and the Caucasus on the west. The Turkestan column was under the orders of General Kaufmann, which we saw before, and the line of march led across the steppes. The Khivans were defeated in several skirmishes and forced to abandon their capital. The Khan signed a treaty of peace by which a heavy indemnity was imposed and territorial cessions were made by which the entire east coast of the Caspian Sea was brought under the dominion of the northern power. In 1875, a revolution occurred in Kokand and the conquest of the Khanate was completed. So yeah, once again, that article just goes quite in depth into exactly what Russia was doing. Thank you all for your support. I hope you've learned something today. Definitely drop a comment if you want me to talk about something specifically that I mentioned today. If you want me to go back and talk about that, drop me a comment so I remember. So whatever you want to hear about, we'll go back and we'll talk about it. Just let me know. Thank you to all my supporters. You guys are the best. If you'd like to support the channel, you can join the Patreon, or you can join the channel memberships. If you do that, you'll get access to the Discord server where you can come and talk to me and the others. Thank you, and I'll see you on the next episode.